Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Burger King, a whopper of a story on life and leadership, by Jim Mclamore. Narrated by B.J. Harrison. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to tables present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Foreword. Jim Mclamore, the businessman, was a true entrepreneur, one whose vision created a great American enterprise through his dogmatic approach in business and in life. He was the ideal person to team up with Dave Edgerton to start the Burger King empire. Jim was the perfect CEO, one whose strengths in planning, administration, and finance made for an excellent partnership with Dave, who was the perfect operational and engineering expert. Together, they became one of the greatest success stories of our time. This book represents the bulk of my father's professional life. His achievements did not stop with his retirement from Burger King in 1972 at age 46, but continued in his work as a board member for many corporations and carried through to his philanthropy. His philosophy of giving back to his community and to the institutions that helped propel him along the way was paramount to his wishes for the Mclamore Family Foundation. Fittingly, near the end of his life, the franchise community, Burger King Corporation, Dave Edgerton, and the family all came together to pay tribute to Dad by helping to fund the James W. Mclamore Executive Education Training Center at the University of Miami. When we presented this honor to him, we also announced our creation and naming of the Burger King Mclamore Foundation in support of education throughout the United States. He was deeply honored and humbled. Dad's greatest talent was his gentle approach to doing business. Whether you were a crew member, a manager, a franchisee, or a corporate executive, he treated you with respect and was eager to learn more about you and your opinions. Many early franchisees have said that his word was his bond, and that's just the way he did business from the beginning. Trust, loyalty, devotion, and compassion were virtues deeply ingrained in his personality. Fortunately, he carried those traits into his philanthropic efforts. As chairman of the Board of Trustees of the University of Miami, Dad spearheaded the now famous $400 million 5-year fundraising campaign, which far exceeded its goal by raising just over $517 million by its conclusion. Chuck Cobb, a family friend and fellow board member, said at Dad's memorial service, he judged his ability to inspire a donation by how big a gulp they took when he asked for their contribution. An article written after his death made mention of Dad as the master gardener, capable of growing people as well as plants. He had a talent at both, but he was best known for his tropical garden at home. Dad carried over his gardening interest to the Fairchild Tropical Garden after Hurricane Andrew took its toll. As the newly elected chairman of the board of the garden, he took great pride in announcing a $5 million fundraising plan to a shocked board of directors, throwing in the fact that he had already raised $1.5 million. We are constantly reminded by others what a great inspiration Dad has been, and how lucky they feel to have known him. He was a hero to us all, and will be missed. Sterling Whitman Mclamore. Introduction. We are competing in a global marketplace where labor costs are a fraction of our own, with jobs and production leaving the country in search of more favorable economic advantages. Like it or not, U.S. corporations are cutting out much of the fat as they continually try to get leaner and more competitive. Jobs are no longer sacred, and unfortunate as it may be, corporate loyalty to long-term employees is becoming less significant in the minds of corporate executives. Competitive efficiency is the major issue concerning businessmen today. Lean and hungry is the watchword. Survival instinct is the driving force in determining corporate strategy. In this maze, people can be expendable. When the corporate world gets increasingly competitive, workers will be asked to do the same. If they elect not to, they risk losing their jobs to less demanding workers. Sounds pretty grim, right? Well, not necessarily. In an age of corporate downsizing, wherein corporations are driven toward the increased efficiencies of outsourcing and competitive labor pricing, two things will begin to happen, both good. First, corporate profits will increase, even in the face of the lowering of consumer prices, which then brings greater confidence to financial markets, a key principle in the success of the Burger King empire. Today we have huge economic advantages in the fields of high technology, space endeavors, communications, aircraft production, and many other activities. World demand will increase, and this will benefit our economy, but competitive threats coming out of global markets will be a constant thorn in our side. Companies may fail for a variety of reasons, but tomorrow's failures will occur principally because, 1, they are over-leveraged and can't service their debts. 2, their markets have shifted and they have been unable to react to the change. 3, they don't have a working strategy designed to give customers value. Or 4, they have an uninspired workforce lacking leadership. The second advantage will involve the future formation of a number of different businesses and new industries. Workers of all ages should remain sensitive to the developments which are already taking place. These developments point to a window of opportunity for them, and it is just around the corner. This doom and gloom forecasting is bunk. Remember, the commercial jet age didn't begin until the 1960s. No one ever heard of television broadcasting until we were approaching the 1950s. Motels and fast food didn't exist. In 1969, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. The space age dawned. Just imagine these questions in context of that time. What is a computer? What does software mean? Can you explain analog, digital, streaming, and DVD? What do you mean by heart transplant, fiber optic cable, satellites in orbit, Walmart, or nuclear? What is a cell phone? Interstate highway system? The point is that new business opportunities open up constantly and will continue to develop at an ever-increasing rate. Opportunity exists around every corner. If I were a young person today, I would use credit cards very cautiously. I think too many Americans have taken on too much debt, and not enough of them have given the proper amount of thought to saving, budgeting expenses, or planning for retirement. The seeds of trouble are there. The sudden loss of income can seriously disrupt people's lives. Ours is the most debt-driven society in the world. A lot of personal despair could be avoided by better sense and better planning. What are the common threads? Preparation and planning. Being current so you are savvy enough to recognize the opportunities that cross your path, and ready to seize them when they do. And having the ability to sidestep pitfalls that disguise themselves as solutions. Written at a time that was rife with change at every level, often coming at breakneck pace, this book will not only recall a number of bonehead decisions I made, and there were quite a few of them, but also summon a recollection of some of the people I met and the lessons I learned, both good and bad. This book is the story of my life, both its successes and failures in business and personally. How did I embrace innovation and change? How did I recognize the opportunity to grow the glimmer of an idea into one of the most widely recognized and trusted brands in the world? My success with Burger King was unique in that I succeeded where others failed. Many of us jumped into the new market of fast food restaurants, but only a few of us made it out in one piece. I locate most of the keys to my success in working hard and partnering with the right people, particularly Dave Edgerton and the incredible franchisees that helped Burger King grow so quickly. I hope in writing this that others can learn from my mistakes and triumphs to succeed in their own endeavors. Jim Mclamore, 1996. Chapter 1. Early Life. What are the main factors in determining a person's character, attitude, behavior, and sense of values? It is a question that begs an answer, but in my judgment, it suggests that a child's early development has a lot to do with it. I would venture to say that personality traits are rather well established long before a child becomes a teenager. Childhood is a time in life when priorities become established, values are determined, and a person's mindset is created. By the time I was 10 years old, I had developed a fair sense of things I thought were important, including my family. I was guided by their influence and what they taught me. I came to understand the importance of parental love and guidance at an early age, having lost my mother at age 3 and my father at 21. The years spent with my family shaped so many parts of me and instilled a sense of purpose in my life. This is not to suggest that it saved me from making a lot of dumb mistakes later on, many of them during my business career. I was born in 1926 in New York City. My father, Thomas Milton Mclamore, was born on July 5, 1889 in Texas, and came from a poor family, which ultimately settled in Louisiana. I don't really remember much of my mother. She was born Marion Floyd Whitman, and as an only child, led a comfortable life. She met my father, a handsome lieutenant in the U.S. Army, who had recently returned from service in France. Falling in love after meeting her, he soon proposed, and they married on April 30th, 1923. Economic times in the United States just prior to 1926 were very good. The country was growing rapidly, and the Whitman family business was successful, enabling the family to live in style. Grandfather Whitman had bought Edge Hill, the family farm in Central Valley, New York, and it became an important focus of life for the Whitman family. After I was born, Mother and Father bought a home and moved to Montclair, New Jersey, within easy commuting distance of New York City. My sister Claire arrived on February 3rd, 1924. I arrived on May 30th, 1926, and my brother David on February 18th, 1928. The family lived in the Montclair residence until a deepening national economic crisis developed, which culminated in the stock market crash in October of 1929. This event virtually wiped out the family fortune and drastically changed the lifestyle of my parents, maternal grandparents, and many Americans alike. Within a few weeks, stock prices plunged over 40%, and led to the Great Depression, the worst economic disaster in the nation's history. James Spur Whitman, my grandfather, died in that frantic year of 1929 at 76 years old. I feel certain that the crash of 1929 was largely responsible for his death, inasmuch as the family fortune had simply evaporated. The realization of this loss must have been devastating to him. In short order, the family sold the New York City townhouse and the home in Montclair and moved to Edge Hill. The shock of the Depression and the loss of the family wealth had a terrible effect on Mother. She was committed to a sanitarium shortly after my brother David was born. I never saw her again, and she died in 1933. The Whitman wealth was gone, and my father lost his job in New York City as the Depression deepened. Times were grim. I became deeply attached to Edge Hill, the only home I knew as a young boy. But during the summer of 1933, there was a fire in the hay stores, and while the livestock was saved, Edge Hill as a working farm was no more. What the fire did not finish, the rising tide of the Depression did. In order to make ends meet, Grandmother began to sell her most prized possessions, which included her silverware, china, furniture, and jewelry. She was also forced to sell about half of the 200-acre Edge Hill farm to the Cornell family. Even as a little boy, it was evident at the time that things were changing. Through it all, Grandmother was a tower of strength. She never let on that these were stressful times for her, or that she was worried about holding the family together. This lovable grandmother of mine took every blow in stride with a fierce determination to see the family through. In 1929, she was 65 years old. Her doctors had warned her she had a weak heart and should be careful about overexerting herself. Dad's job at the bank required him to take a train to New York every Sunday night and return after work on Fridays. This meant that Grandmother had to play the role of mother and part-time father. She played it beautifully. My education began in September of 1931, a few months after my 5th birthday. Throughout my schooling, I was assigned to classes where students were a year or more older than I was. I wanted to be the best student or the best athlete in the class, and the challenge was heightened by the disparity of our age differences, as the gap remained throughout my education. During my 8 years in Central Valley's public school, I gained some experience in public speaking at township events at various student gatherings. On one occasion, I delivered the oration, "O Captain, My Captain," at the public gazebo in town. I was plenty nervous, but I had memorized the poem well enough to recite it. I think I was 11 years old at the time, but I remember the occasion. I came to understand then that public speaking is a talent which encourages the development of other communication skills. This is of considerable value to people hoping to succeed in the world of business. Looking back, I developed an urgent sense of wanting to be successful in life. I had no idea what that would involve, of course, but I had no shortage of ambition. I felt pretty good about my chances for success. I had an instinctive liking for people, and I wanted people to like me in return, being gregarious and outgoing, and always reaching out to people to make friends. I also had a strong competitive drive. I wanted not only to be a good student, but also to excel in athletics. I thought winning was important. I didn't play in organized sporting events just to be a participant. What was important was winning the game or being on the winning team. Around this time, Grandmother was insistent that her 3 grandchildren should receive as fine an education as possible. She wanted us to go to high school somewhere other than in Central Valley, and began looking for a boarding school that could provide each of us with a springboard to a college education. In 1937, she found the perfect answer. She determined that Claire would go to the Northfield Seminary in Massachusetts, the sister school of the Mount Hermon School for Boys, which is where I was to be sent 2 years later. Grandmother then began to sell her personal assets to obtain the necessary funds for our education. Tragedy struck when grandmother suffered a severe heart attack and died in 1938. It was a terrible blow to all of us, but to me at 11 years old, it was absolutely shattering. Now, with only Dad left, I knew that I would be required more and more to rely on myself. I learned confidence is born of integrity and fair dealing, and is the reward for honesty and performance. Being a former teacher, high school principal, and college graduate, Dad knew the advantages of having a good education, and he wanted me to have the best. In early September of 1939, Dad and I drove to the Mount Hermon School in northern Massachusetts. Our trip coincided with Germany's invasion of Poland, the beginning of World War II. Both events proved to be important in determining my future. Unfortunately, being away from home those first few weeks was tough on me. Dad had to return to the school to give me a firm talking to. Finally, he turned to me and said, "Jimmy, I'm not going to take you home with me. You are going to stay here and tough it out, so you had better prepare yourself to do that." I knew his heart was breaking, seeing me in such a dreadful emotional state. He told me that Mount Hermon was the right experience for me. There was nothing to do but force myself to straighten up and get on with it. During the next few days, I gradually came out of my terrible state of depression and began to get caught up in the excitement of the school activities. I threw myself into athletics, classes, studying, meeting other boys, making new friends, eating good food, and generally enjoying my new home. I began to think of Mount Hermon as my new home away from home, and this helped to trigger a sense of independence and self-reliance that I had never known before. This newfound confidence and the opportunity to learn and to grow was inspirational for my first year. Returning to Mount Hermon in September of 1940, I was filled with expectations and very happy to be back. I was given a work assignment in the kitchen at West Hall. Working in the dining hall and helping prepare food for a community of 600 boys and faculty members was my first food service experience, and I recall enjoying it. In May of 1942, I was elected president of our class for the upcoming senior year. I was also in the midst of planning to go on to college, yet in the background was the war and the likelihood of my entering the service. Seniors were given aptitude tests to assist school counselors in helping determine a student's most appropriate career path and the best university to attend. My test results were revealing. I was advised to pursue a business career connected with sales or marketing. I had a liking for people and believed that I had developed some worthwhile interpersonal skills as a result of my Mount Hermon experience, which coincided nicely with this career path. I was interested in books written about the 1800s, when many of the early and great American fortunes were built. Horatio Alger's stories were popular during the Depression years and the 1940s, and I enjoyed reading these books and the success stories they told. Stories about Vanderbilt, Astor, Jay Gould, E. H. Harriman, James J. Hill, Rockefeller, and Flagler fascinated me. Books about Wall Street, finance, and the building of the railroads and the great industrial companies were of special interest. I wanted to know more about the robber barons and more about the great fortunes made by such men as J.P. Morgan, Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie, and others. The answers were in books, and I read a lot of them. My career goal after leaving Mount Hermon and entering college was to build a successful business career for myself, and I hoped to get rich in the process. Some would argue that perhaps there is something wrong with someone making a lot of money. Some believe that when a person becomes wealthy, he always does so at the expense of others. Nothing was further from the truth, of course, but it is hard to convince a great many people about that. The unfortunate fact is that there are all too many greedy and dishonest businessmen who take advantage of situations that enable them to profit at the expense of the public. There is no way to effectively and totally control that in a democratic and free society. I still believe that the pursuit of success in business and the accumulation of wealth that usually accompanies it is a worthy personal goal, deserving of respect. Handling newfound wealth is a totally different matter. When the accumulation of wealth becomes an obsession and a goal unto itself, it can work to a person's disadvantage, often causing personal misery, along with the loss of a worthwhile set of values. I have seen many people in this situation. The problem usually begins with establishing the wrong priorities and focusing on self, as opposed to becoming involved with activities that help to enrich the lives of others. I was particularly fortunate to have had that part of my long-term goals in mind, even as a teenager. I needed to find a college that was affordable and offered me the kind of education that could assist me in starting my own business career. I decided on Cornell University and asked what they offered in the way of business training. I learned that the only school at Cornell that offered a business program was the School of Hotel Administration. I applied for admission, and my application was accepted. At the graduation ceremonies at Mount Hermon, I gave the class president's address, and 149 friends and classmates received their diplomas. It was the end of one era, but the beginning of another. I was reaching for the next rung in the ladder, and I had a clear destination in mind. Chapter 2. Cornell and the Navy. During World War II, the educational format at most universities, including Cornell, was a year-round trimester program as a means of speeding up the educational process. I didn't expect to be called up until sometime in 1944. Until then, a college education was my number one priority. I had 10 days to get to Ithaca, find a job, and register at the university. I had no idea how I was going to raise the tuition money. The tuition at Cornell was only $200 a trimester, but I needed to pay it in advance before I could register for classes. Upon arrival, I was introduced to Professor Herbert H. Wetzel, who was the chairman of the Department of Plant Pathology at the New York College of Agriculture. For many years, Professor Wetzel had taken in students who worked at his home and tended his garden. This was a way a student could earn money for room and board, and hopefully earn enough extra money to pay for tuition and incidental expenses. The prof, as I would come to call him, knew that I was interested in room and board, and it piqued his interest when I told him that I had grown up on a farm. He asked me a lot of questions, and I am sure that my marginally acceptable responses had something to do with his offering me the job. He simply turned to me and said, "Son, I think you will do." The prof lived in a modest home very close to the Cornell campus and the hotel school. I was enthusiastic about the possibility of becoming part of that wonderful family. But there was still one more important thing to be resolved. The prof threw the key question at me and asked how I was going to pay the tuition. I reached in my pocket and placed all the money I had on the top set of the porch. We counted it together, and it came to $11.34. Turning to me, he said, "Look, son, I wasn't talking about your pocket money. I was talking about how much money you have to pay your tuition. You realize, don't you, that it is due in a few days?" I responded, "Well, that's all the money I have, Professor Wetzel." He seemed
Sample complete. Ready to continue?